Hi, welcome to Shelf Starters. I'm Rosie.
And I'm Kate, and it's been a while.
Been a while. We went on holiday, so we haven't done this for a while. But now we're back with Spenser again for the last time, which I'm actually kind of sad about because I really like Spenser.
He's been a really especially these last ones, Rosie, that are not the most familiar to me in terms of when, that's not what I hear of when I hear of Spenser. It's not these two particular works, but these are my faves.
Yeah.
What about you?
I love them. Yeah, I really love them.
So we're talking about Amoretti, and how do you say, is it Epithalamion?
Well, I put it through Google pronunciation thing, and I think it is Epithalamion.
Epithalamion. Okay. So these two works are a bit of a shift because we're moving from Queen Elizabeth I, to his own personal Elizabeth.
So he was widowed, and then he starts courting Elizabeth. What's her surname?
Elizabeth Boyle.
Elizabeth Boyle.
Yeah.
And it's basically, they're two different works. Amoretti is a series of sonnets.
Yes.
Kind of charting his progress courting her.
So there's sonnets with a difference because we're not just looking at that idea of unattainable love, unrequited love, and sorrow and sadness. They're actually filled with plenty of joy, which is another shift. He loves to forge new ground, obviously. And then the other work,
Epithalamion, is a wedding song. It's like Greek tradition, ancient Greek tradition, and it's usually someone else who would
sing this song,
about someone else's wedding, but he's doing it for his own, and so it charts like hour by hour the progression.
That's right, because it's a 24-hour period, isn't it? Or it's 24. There are 24 stanzas.
Mm-hmm.
And it represents that idea of a 24-hour period. And are there 365 lines? Did I read that somewhere?
Yeah. So he's very precise with the structure.
Yeah.
He's doing a lot with time.
Yes.
And
time's a big thing. Yeah.
And it's nice because it's basically, charts, the wedding day, the excitement getting ready, and then also the bride's procession to the wedding.
Yes. Which is full of lovely joy. It's great.
Yeah, it's a very joyous poem.
Yes. But he does, I note, turn his attention from the actual ceremony and the joy to this a little slight obsession with procreation and and producing an heir, I guess. I thought, okay, so he's not that different from everybody else then at that point. Yeah. Or from historical figures and his time, I suppose. But what joy. Anyway, the version I have, Rosie, which is probably different from yours because you will have supplemented the anthology, I'm sure, have you?
Yes. So I read all of the sonnets in Amoretti, but I focused obviously on the ones that were in the Norton.
Yes, because we in the Norton only have a highlighted selection, which is good. I mean, we've got obviously from the very beginning, the first one. And there's a really interesting chartering of the metaphors he uses. So he opens with a book metaphor, there's one per stanza. It's kind of nice. Yeah. So he opens with a book metaphor, doesn't he?
Yep.
And he actually positions himself as the pages in a book that are being held in her delicate hands, which is interesting because I guess he's putting her in a commanding position.
Yes.
Right up front, and he's kind of looking for her, calling for her acceptance of his letters of love, which is lovely. Oh, we should talk about Amoretti, the title.
Oh yeah. Did we figure out what that meant?
Yes, I looked it up because for me it means a liqueur, but actually it's not. It means little loves or little cupids.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So it's kind of like little poems.
Yeah.
Little love poems kind of thing.
Yes, and of course, Cupids and the gods enter in along the way.
Yeah. Oh, there's so many references to.
Yes, God. And it is challenging if you don't know your classical literature and your classicism. You need to kind of it would help enormously to have a greater awareness of that than I have, for example.
I think so, but I think it is, like, as a whole, these poems are quite approachable though, compared to.
Oh, there certainly are. I mean, you can't. You're not going to miss the tone. You're not going to miss the richness of the language, and you're not going to miss the metaphors.
The metaphors, yeah, they're
and
really
the message
clear.
of each stanza. It's very, very clear. It's just that there's another whole layer there if you have that background in classicism, I think. Yeah. So the opening one, as we said, is talking about himself as a book and in her hands, literally. And then he moves to this idea of a ship.
And I like that.
In the one I'm reading, in which skips to, it jumps to stanza 34. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think then he's talking about her as a guiding star, and he's a ship in the ocean needing to be steered.
Exactly. Like, it's like his life's purpose.
Yeah. So
guiding him that way.
Yes.
The lodestar, I like.
The lodestar. Yes. So she's still in command in this one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we move to 37, and this is all about her hair, her golden tresses. And now she sounds like she's a bit of a kind of, or it reminded me of the mermaids luring people in.
Yeah, because it references a net of gold.
Yes. Yes. The golden tresses. Yeah.
Hair as being fetters.
Yes. So like chains. Yeah. Yeah.
So he's like entrapped by her, but he's okay with it.
Yeah, he's entangled. Exactly. So she's gone from commanding to being, a little bit that kind of stance that is very common in literature of a woman as a lure. Yeah. And something perhaps a little bit stronger than just being commanding.
Yeah.
And then he goes to the theatre. Conceit of the
this
theatre.
one, I wrote Shakespeare next to it because it felt very familiar to
me. The theatre one?
Yeah. But especially the first lines of this world's theatre in which we stay, my love, like the spectator idly sits. It just felt a bit like
Shakespeare.
That bit, all the world's a stage.
Yeah, Shakespeare. Yeah, absolutely.
So,
absolutely.
It felt like he must have read this.
and it's interesting, the end of it though, when it says, he talks about her, those last two lines, where he talks about what could possibly move her and how she is no woman but a senseless stone, like she's unyielding and hard. So it's a bit of a switch now. Here. Yeah.
Gone from her being in control and him kind of loving that to it's a
being a sorceress and then to being hard and unmovable.
Yeah.
And then we jump 10 stanzas to stanza 64. And then he kind of moves to the scent of her, doesn't he? And there's a bit of a change in their relationship at this point.
A lot more flower imagery for this one. So it feels like at this point he's already kind of won her over. This is now love is.
There's a change in the power dynamics.
Yeah, it is beautiful. I knew you'd like this one because you love all the nature ones.
I do. I love the nature ones. I like the gardens of sweet flowers, and I like the roses and the columbines and the strawberries. I love all that. I can just imagine it. I just think smell is the strongest sense on which to call if you want to evoke an atmosphere and a feeling. And it works here. Really works here. And then we go to the next one, 65, and we get a bit of her fear. And what she fears, I think, is fascinating because it's pretty forward thinking for the time.
Being trapped.
And I can't help thinking that he must be thinking about Elizabeth I as well.
Yes, because later on there are references directly to Elizabeth. But I think the fact that, you can't not really think about it in this time where Elizabeth is obviously what everyone's talking about.
Well, and she's kind of not bending to the idea of marrying because she would lose her power. So there's a really...
you're going to make the connection.
you can't not. Yeah, you can't not.
And it's about a woman being trapped by marriage.
Yes.
Activity, essentially, and not being able to... he's got literally a bird in a cage reference, so not being able to spread their wings and do whatever they want.
And he's trying to make the argument that you gain two liberties by being married. That fondly fear to loose your liberty when loosing one, two liberties you gain. and make him bondage did fly. So she's the bird.
And then it talks about, being the tower, the brazen tower and sacred bower. So yeah, it's like a combination of pleasure, but also a place that you're being trapped, essentially.
Yeah, a bit like, it's kind of, then I felt a bit of Coleridge, influence on Coleridge maybe, when he talks about the bower and how he's trapped there. Yeah.
The idea of someone like a damsel in a tower.
That it can't be reached. Yes.
Yeah.
And then what about the next one we have, which is 67? This is her surrender, isn't it, in this one? He's talking about himself as a hunter.
Which is more familiar with some of the other poems that we've seen. Like I was thinking of, was it Thomas, what's his name? Thomas Wyatt.
Yeah, yes.
With the one about the hind.
That feels like a long time ago now, doesn't it?
Lister Hunt. I really liked Who Say Lister Hunt.
That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yep. So that's, till I in hand her yet half trembling took, and with her own goodwill her firmly tied. Strange thing me seemed to see a beast so wild, so goodly one, with her own will beguiled. That's, pretty powerful, isn't it, her surrender? And then he moves on to an actual specific time. He talks about Easter.
Yeah, a lot of these two poems are all about, like, they kind of progress in the same way that time progresses. A lot of references to, like, religious markings of the calendar, I suppose. So, now we get to Easter, which is obviously supposed to be a new beginning.
Celebration of beginnings, that's right, and that idea of creation. It brings all his Elizabeths together in 74, in stanza 74.
Yeah, this is the one I think that's interesting. His mother, first of all, called Elizabeth.
Yeah, so his mother, the Queen, and then his second wife. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he brings them, and he actually directly references all three. Like, he's very open.
Yeah, my mother's womb, then my sovereign queen, most kind, third, my loves. It's really interesting because it's like family, sovereign,
romantic love.
Really encompasses everything, and interesting that they were all represented by Elizabeths for him. So, interesting.
Ye three Elizabeths forever live, that three such graces did unto me give. So he goes through what they've given. So honor and richesse, body, fortune, mind, descent. Yeah, he works out what each one kind of represents.
The biggest thing that 74 does here is really make it clear that he's been thinking about Elizabeth throughout the rest of them. So anytime that we've been thinking, that could be a reference to Queen Elizabeth and the situation, I think this just kind of makes it clear
that yes, we were right to think that
it is. So like as itself, I don't think that it's necessarily like the nicest of the poems, because it's just really, that's all it's saying. It's just there were three Elizabeths in my life.
But it's really interesting that he is so openly bringing them together, I think, and that he can knit the personal with the public so well, and he does.
And then I think I read that also at this very specific time, it was when she was being courted by someone in particular. And so it actually was a bit risky to reference this.
To reference his relationship with her.
Courting, like this whole sequence is about his courting, and then he brings in Elizabeth, and we obviously going to be thinking about her.
We're going to make that. Yeah.
And then that's quite a risky situation. So.
And then we, in this version, we close with 75 and 79. So he talks here about the idea of immortalizing his love in verse. So he actually, it's like a meta poetry, which is interesting. Again, ahead of his time, I think. And then he kind of comes to the close, where he's talking about just how it's going to go on forever.
Yeah, which is lovely.
Yeah. It's kind of what you'd want to hear, wouldn't you?
Yes. And kind of nice to have this this charting of the whole relationship. I think that's really nice. So that's
that there's a little bit of tension and there's a little bit of pushback.
Yeah.
But then it kind of comes to its kind of rightful, perfect close.
And then we get Epithalamion, and I love Epithalamion because
that's beautiful.
You can so picture it. So it's supposed to be at the beginning you call on the muses, and then it goes through like a wedding procession kind of situation. And there's all of this nature imagery throughout it.
Yep.
Which is just
my favorite. Absolutely.
Yeah, we do have that. Yeah, he does call to the muses, so he keeps with that part of the tradition. But then he says he's going to do it himself. He says, "So unto myself alone I will sing."
So he's combining his roles, and he's being the poet and the groom at the same time.
Yeah, and then this repeated line, "The woods shall to me answer, and my echo ring."
What did you make of the stanza where he starts talking about wolves?
Which one is that?
I think it's stanza 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. He starts talking about wild wolves and being devoured, and it gets kind of a bit scary. So I kind of read that as being like nervous, like having that apprehension before the big wedding, like the deed. But then I read something that said, it could also be to do with the Irish resistance, because he wrote these poems when he was living in Ireland.
So it's it takes that Greek tradition and then it brings it to small town Ireland.
Yeah.
And incorporates the like fairy folklore kind of vibe
yes.
Ireland. I don't remember the wolves.
I just went, oh, that's weird, because it came out after all this kind of talking of nymphs and flowers and greenery and beauty, and then suddenly there's these kind of wild wolves seeking to devour, and it's like, okay, all right, that's interesting. It's kind of, I guess, that same conceit, that idea in romanticism of the kind of the dark side of nature, the sublime kind of notion. Anyway, it interested me because it kind of rubbed against where I was at.
Our wolves must seek to devour.
Yeah.
With your
it just kind of stuck right out, I thought.
It sort of reminds me also of Diana. It's got that woodland imagery of
Diana. Huntress. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then he addresses his bride directly, and he's a bit impatient. He's kind of
so it does have a natural like, while it is all fairy imagery, kind of nature, beauty, otherliness kind of thing, it does have that real time pressure as well.
Yes.
We have to go now.
Come on, let's get on with it. And he also he brings in the actual wedding guests as well, the participants in the ceremony. And then there's a stanza about the ideal woman, all about her internal beauty, which I think is really interesting also, because it's a time when the external beauty was really celebrated in sonnets, and he's talking about her internal beauty. And then he goes into the temple doors, and he kind of does a bit of a shift away out of nature and inside, like a more traditional kind of religious wedding zone.
Music's very strong.
Or Christian kind of wedding, I suppose, as opposed to the pagan nature focus of before.
Of the outside part,
And that's, then he goes to the actual bride before the altar and the actual ceremony. And then we get the actual celebrations after that. And as soon as he's done with the celebrations, it's like, okay, now
it's night.
Yep. And I need to do the deeds and have children, pretty much.
Yes. So, line 300, now night has come.
Yes.
Soon her disarray, in her bed her lay.
Yes.
And then whole wedding night.
Yeah, he's desperate to be alone with the bride, which is fair enough.
Yeah, but before we always had this repeated line, the woods shall answer and their echo ring. And at the wedding night, the woods no more shall answer, nor your echo ring. So it's like finally they get some privacy.
Yes, which I guess is kind of what happens at most weddings. You have this big celebration and a huge amount of time with a lot of people and a lot of focus of attention on yourselves. And then you kind of get to the point where you really need that all to close and you can be by yourselves.
That night's so long expected.
Yes, I've been waiting and waiting and waiting. But then he has kind of I think, a little shift in tone where he starts kind of looking at the, possible dangers ahead, he starts talking about, I think it's 19. There's a raven, there's reference to a raven and kind of lightning, and there's a bit, possible danger. Yeah.
Let lamenting cries nor doleful tears, that sounds like.
Yeah.
It talks about fear and even ghosts.
Yes. So it's a really huge kind of movement through this kind of joy, anticipation, excitement to, and celebration, to wanting to be alone and really, really intimate, to then this kind of foreboding almost, I guess, and questioning.
It becomes joyful again.
And he calls for the gods to bless the marriage.
Yeah. And then there was reference to the moon again, Cynthia.
Yes, that's about fertility, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And then there was a lot of reference at this time with Cynthia being linked to Elizabeth as well.
Ah, okay.
The moon at the window.
Oh, like she's watching over them, or she's a presence.
I don't know if I'm reading into that because it's not specific, like it's not like a permanent thing that Elizabeth equals this Cynthia, but he had done it in the Fairy Queen. He'd made them the same. So
yes. So you think, yep. And then the stanza that the second to last stanza, when he talks about the conception is the priority.
Yeah. Chaste womb informed with timely seed.
Yep.
And then send us the fruit of the same night, so that we may raise large posterity.
Yep.
So yeah, it's all about then procreation.
Yep. And the gods blessing the marriage, and I guess the ultimate blessing of a marriage is in fact a child. And then he ends it really neatly, where he turns in on the ode itself. That meta again.
Going back to here I am song,
writing poetry,
a goodly ornament. So it's basically in praise of her, and this is what I can offer her.
This is what I'm giving you.
Yeah, I really like it. I think the image, like this imagery, is just incredible.
Yes,
it's
and
beautiful.
No wonder. Yeah, that's right. And it is really unique, because it's unique in terms of his stance, and it's unique in terms of what he does with form.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, it's incredibly clever and incredibly dense and rich. I'm so glad we looked at it. So glad we looked at it.
I actually think Spenser, like, I never really thought that I would love Spenser so much. It was always like something I knew I wanted to read, just because, it's such a big, such a monumental thing that you kind of feel like you should at least attempt at some point in your life. But I never honestly thought that I would like Spenser as much as I have.
No.
And now, like, I feel quite sad that we're finishing up with him now.
I know. Where do we go next, Rosie? We now go to some miscellaneous works.
Yeah, and I think we should do it all in one. So next we see everyone, we will be talking about a whole heap of random poems from different poets. So we'll get a bit of a snapshot of a few, like a lot of different people of the time.
And this is all in Elizabethan times, all Elizabethan works. Yes.
Elizabethan poetry. So we get a range of poets. We get George Gascoigne, we get Henry Constable, Fulk Greville, Thomas Lodge, Samuel Daniel. It's a lot of poets who did these sonnet cycles.
Yes. Which will be good. It'll be interesting.
I think it will show us like the trends in the time in terms of like style and form and all that, and we can see how Spenser compares and how Spenser might have influenced some of it. But let us know if you like Spenser, and
I'm sure there'll be many a Spenser fan out there.
Yeah. Well,
who will commiserate with us for having to, come to the close of that section of our journey. But anyway.
I mean, there's more poems in here, in the shorter poems. This has everything else other than the Fairy Queen. But I think that the Norton pulled out the highlights for sure. So the Shepherd's Calendar and the Amoretti and Epithalamion. So yeah, we've covered the best of it.
We will look forward to seeing everyone next week.
Thanks for watching, everyone.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Bye.